I was 15, and I will never forget this night. I had just left a friend's house, and I was waiting for my stepfather to come pick me up. This was about 12 a.m. on a weekend, roughly less than a mile from my house, in the city I grew up in, where I thought I was safe and pretty much knew everybody. I did not have a cell phone at the time, which makes my skin crawl even more every time I repeat the story. I waited in a well-lit parking lot where there's a Dunkin' Donuts, a Petco, and it's right across from the city's courthouse. Everything was obviously closed, but being in a well-lit area was the safest place I figured to wait at the time. As I was waiting, an SUV drove by once, twice, 3 times. I noticed it the second time because there was nobody on the road, and obviously I was waiting for someone. By the third time, it had slowed down to a little more than a crawl, at which time I had an instant gut feeling something was wrong. The vehicle turned around and whipped into the parking lot. It stopped sideways about 8 feet in front of me, and 5 guys hopped out from the vehicle. Doors opened, coming towards me, not saying a word. I backed up as far as I could, frozen in fear. A million things ran through my head as to how long I could fight them all off before my stepdad would be there. My back was against a concrete wall. I knew it was there, but it still caught me off guard because I literally had nowhere to go. As I sit here today, I swear by the grace of God, my stepfather came flying into the parking lot, laying on his horn, and these guys ran back into the car and took off like bats out of hell. I run to the car, and my stepfather's screaming, "Who are those guys? What are they going to do to you?" I was shaking uncontrollably, tears in my eyes, telling him I had no fucking idea. He tried to chase them. We got a little ways before they lost us. All I can think about is, what if he had hit one more red light? What if he didn't leave at the time that he did? What if he just took 2 minutes longer to get ready? God knows what would have happened to me. This is one of the scariest things that ever happened to me, and to this day, I have no fucking idea where they came from or who they were. I definitely had someone watching out for me that night. A few friends and I decided to go to this abandoned village and explore it. It was already dark outside, so we had to use phone flashlights. I had never done anything like that. There is basically this one huge building that used to be a sanitarium inside an old manor, and then few houses around that. So we started with 4 identical houses, but there were literally just 5 empty rooms in each of them. Then we went to the main building. That is this huge 3-floor manor turned into a sanitarium in Soviet times. It was epic. You could see all of the therapy rooms, buffet, etc. And then we went to this 2-floor apartment. It looked like the typical Soviet apartment building. There were 2 Soviet-time beds, some random shoes, jackets, magazines, beer cans, etc. You could see that someone was living there not too long ago. We got a bit scared and decided to leave the place, but this one guy felt super brave and went into that room. And at the other end of the room, there was this massive wooden door that locked, and it was only a few years old. A more modern door. We opened them a little bit and instantly heard a dog barking and scraping from the other side of the door. Not a small dog. It sounded like something huge. We literally went running. We ran down the stairs. When we got outside and noticed that the dog wasn't following us, we decided to leave. When we got back to the car and we were driving away, we noticed that the windows of the room where the dog was were covered with some kind of plastic from the inside, and that there was some kind of super dim light coming from there. Only after some time we started thinking about it and we understood that it was most likely a drug lab. It is literally in the middle of the forest, and they chose literally the most boring building from them all. The first dog outside is there to warn them that someone is coming, and those magazines and beds are most likely to scare people away. I think that we were lucky to be alive and without injury. Like, okay, there were 7 of us, but angry dog or drug dealers are not comparable to 7 teenagers. A few years ago, I found a story online that hit me. Not many of them do. It was a very long fictional story, and it was written incredibly, brutally well. If you are a fan or familiar with Poppy Z. Bright's writing and romance style, it was like that, and I absolutely fell in love with it. Particularly the author's writing style. I'm keeping this vague because this guy is some kind of well-known, at least in certain parts of the internet, and despite all of this, I still have mixed feelings on him. We'll get on that though. This story stuck on me, and I bookmarked it knowing I'd want to read it again eventually. About a half a year passed, give or take, and in the time, the computer I'd saved it on shit the bed, so when out of nowhere I got to thinking on that story again, wanting to reread it, I had to hunt it down all over again. I remembered bits of it had been on DeviantArt, and I started there, figuring that scraps and teaser bits might lead to the full story. I found the author's website instead, which had links to actually buy the damn thing, which made my day. I managed to refine the story online, wish-listed the physical copy, and then found that the author, who I'll refer to as Sam from here on out, had several social media links up. One of them was Tumblr, which I was sadly a pretty avid user of at the time. I shot him an anonymous message, as was my habit at the time, lauding his wonderful writing and lauding the impact it had taken on me, following him on the site immediately after. Somewhere around this point, I got the guts up to write him personally, and despite how silly it sounds and felt at the time even, I was almost ecstatic when he responded. We started emailing back and forth due to Tumblr's tiny word limit, and eventually the waiting time led quick enough to chatting on Yahoo Messenger. Around this point, I was having a lot of emotional issues. I've dealt with severe depression and anxiety for more than half of my life. If I ever post some of my other experiences, a lot of that will make sense, and it was an awesome distraction. He was a huge Stephen King fan, as am I, and we bonded on that right off the bat. From the first night we talked, we were sharing music preferences, sending little bundles of songs we thought the other might like. It was nice, and it was a pleasant surprise since the songs he suggested I actually did wind up liking. Things changed, and sometimes I kick myself for not seeing it coming, because he wasn't exactly opaque about his oddities, but I blame a lot of it on how much respect I'd built towards this man on his writing capacities. We talked a lot. He started sending me videos, mostly everything and anything, of Ross Williams. Sam was obsessed with Ross, and obsessed with hating Valorcand, the singer who took over after Ross committed suicide. I'd never known much about Ross's music or ideas, and I'll totally confess that I was intrigued after hearing a bit of it. I could sympathize with Sam's rage, too. Here was this brilliant artist who had just hit his breaking point and given in to it, and his legacy was being eradicated by this guy Valor. It just got ridiculous, though, and I'm getting ahead of myself a bit, Sam was obsessed with gore. I went through a heavy gorichin phase when I was younger, so it didn't faze me at first, but after a while it just really got suffocating, unnecessary, and way over the goddamn top perverse. Don't get me wrong, he was never offensive and never made a single uncomfortable advance towards me. The farthest it had gone at this point was him telling me I was lovely and to stop thinking poorly of myself, which I honestly appreciated and still do. Just constant commentary about his boys and what he wanted to do to them. Everything was a fetish to this man. Medical, absolutely. Intestines, totally. Musician he respected, on their knees, vomiting and having breakdowns, fuck yeah. It's like there were no boundaries, no off limits, an absolute lack of real respect because everything had to be perverse. Everything had to be fappable. It was annoying, but not disconcerting until he started telling me about his relationships. Here, I actually feel a bit guilty, but hell, I'm in this far. He insisted that he was in a romantic relationship with two ghosts. His two pet ghost boys. I'm a believer in the paranormal, and I have seen some damnably strange shit in my life, but still, I just couldn't take it. I never said it to his face, and technically I'm not calling it outright impossible, but it was just too goddamn much. Way too goddamn much. He'd tell me about visiting Jeffrey Dahmer on the other side and partying with him. Like, what? Really? Seriously? What the fuck, dude? Referred to everyone that wasn't him or someone he approved of as mortals or humans. Like a fucking 12-year-old kid hitting their Anne Rice years. Just, So many things. Somewhere in this mess he told me he had multiples. But they weren't multiples, and some weren't human, but they're totally more than ghost. I don't even fucking know. It just kinda piled. It started to get way worse, mostly with him freaking out inexplicably and going on about they and them were saying it was the XUL, but I don't even have the patience to get into that clusterfuck. And at some point much earlier, in a moment of utter idiocracy, I'd given him my boyfriend's phone number. My phone at the time was out of commission, and Lucas' phone was the only one really solidly working in the house, and he offered numerous times for me to call and text this guy when our internet crapped out. We texted a few times, and once or twice Lucas and him would trade messages. The first night I'd talked to him on Skype face-to-face, it'd been both Lucas and I because I'm desperately awkward on Skype for some goddamn reason. He started texting constantly, 5 a.m., 3 a.m., 11 p.m., just really fucking unnecessary hours. I don't work a 9-to-5 job because of my previously mentioned issues, but Lucas does. And just because I don't sleep for days on end doesn't mean that he doesn't. This guy just did not seem to get that. He'd get cranky when I signed off to make dinner, signed off to try and sleep, signed off to try and spend time with my boy. It started to feel like I was his only friend, and I began to first seriously suspect that, and then later completely believed it. Somewhere in the realm of 5 months of us talking, he'd been getting much worse, talking about his dead boys incessantly when he wasn't spamming my inbox with either videos, songs, or pictures of Ross, complete with paragraphs of fanatic gibbering. When it got just fucked up, downright completely fucked up. I couldn't check my fucking email without him seeing me as online and hitting me immediately with 4 or 5 messages. I'd stopped going online for days on end, and when I came back, he was like a cat that hadn't been fed in a fucking week. Just up my ass and suffocating. I'm a musician, and an acquaintance of mine invited me out of the blue to a casual open mic night. I was freaking out trying to decide whether I should go or not, and texted him to get input. He had gotten excited and told me something along the lines of, "If you think you can, I think you definitely should." So that was it. Him, Lucas, and another friend all saying go for it, and I caved. When I told him it was on, he seemed pretty happy for me and told me to tell him all about it. When I got back, me and Lucas walked down there. I played a few songs, and it went amazingly well. I was absolutely buzzed for hours afterwards, as it had been the first time I'd played any kind of live in almost 10 years, and it went so good. Later that night, around 10ish, I think, I texted him to tell him how good it had gone. He was incredibly bitchy in response and immediately sounded like the kind of significant other or spouse that'll push you to go have fun or do something you want for the express purpose of attempting to guilt or berate you about it later. That got me irritated, but I was entirely too pleased to care much, so I tried to drop the conversation. He apologized at some point, asked to call me, and I accepted. What followed was 3 hours on and off of him either drunk to borderline time travel excess, having a full psychiatric break, or drugged out to the point where even Keith Richards would be concerned. He started talking in different tones, different voices, talking about himself in third person. Like I mentioned earlier, he supposedly had some kind of alters that he would later begin sending me messages as, designating the personality shifts, of course, by changing the colors of the fonts. And I'm not going to count that out completely, but holy shit. He started saying incredibly strange things when he wasn't sobbing so hard that the sound cut out, one of which still freaks me out to this day. He'd be mid-sentence crying and screaming about how they did this to him, I've seen him and it's killing him and they did it. And then, clear his throat, calmly apologize and ask me how the open mic night thing went. It was during one of these quiet bits where he started talking in one of the creepiest fucking voices I've ever heard. Though, I still can't explain why it shook me up so bad. I don't remember how it went exactly, but I still got the gist of it. I was in the middle of trying to explain how the thing went, and he cuts me off, and this weirdly soggy, gravelly voice that I could hear the crazy smile in. They're not like you, you know. You didn't belong there with those things. I stopped, and I asked him to repeat, or at least clarify, and he just essentially rephrases it, saying something like, "You felt as out of place as you were, and they knew it. They all knew it." Here's the odd thing. This kid that invited me works with my mom and knows me more by face and reference than personally, and had either of us known more about each other, I'd probably never would have gone. They are super hippie, like can't go more than a few words without talking in the soft, hushing tone about Earth Mother and the man. The only other musician I remember that night was a guy in his 60s playing a ridiculous signal-like song called All Fracked Up. Use your imagination what that was about. And here's Sam making this absurdly accurate comment for no reason. No, nothing. Just, fuck. It sounds so stupid, but it terrified me. He starts asking me in the same god-awful voice, "How drained do you feel right now? How much of you did they steal?" And I'm just noping so fucking hard. It sounds downright ridiculous, sitting here and writing it out to strangers, but I lived it, and it just... yeah. This continues for a few minutes until I have to ask him to repeat himself again, and he breaks back into screaming at me at how I better know who he's talking about by now, and intermittently asking me how could anyone not love Ross. I mean, how dare they? He also hung up on me a handful of times, ending with "fuck this" once and "fuck you" the next. When we actually talked the following morning, he put it on being wasted as fuck. A few months later, he called me again, right around 5 in the fucking morning, and talked for 4 goddamn hours about Ross and how he felt that the world was prejudiced for now acknowledging his dead boys. Another time around that point, he called me again, absolutely livid because his ex was purportedly a semi-well-known model and had the audacity to mention Ross's name. There isn't much of a conclusion to the story, and if you stuck with me this far, I appreciate it. The crazier he got, and the less we actually had any kind of conversation, the less I talked to him. I spent less time online, stayed much more neutral in response, instead of humoring him, etc. It luckily just kind of faded. There have been a few moments though, like the time he spammed my email with requests to jump on board some mass reporting spree he was doing on Tumblr because someone's opinion was hate speech to him. Or when his car was stolen and he sent me a 15-message diatribe written almost exclusively from a we and a our perspective. While I appreciate the occasional WTF in my inbox and wish this guy some kind of sanity or peace, let's not meet again, Sam, and for fuck's sake, let's never meet in person. Back in 2001, my friend and I went to her aunt's cabin for the weekend in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. On the way back home, we fucked up and tempted fate by talking about who of our friends would call if something happened, like our car breaking down or something. Sure enough, doing 60, her engine just dies, and we maneuver to the side of the road and try not to freak out. Nervously laughing, we pull out our phones to make our calls. But no dice, 0 bars. Now we are freaking out. There's been nothing in sight for miles, but we do see a light from a trailer off the road up ahead, and we hash out whether or not we should go and ask for help or what we should do. Finally, we decide we have to go knock and ask to use their phone to call for help. We walk up the long gravel drive, and as we are climbing the steps, my friend tells me not to worry and shows me the butt of a pistol she had tucked in her back. At this point, I feel like my knees are knocking loud enough to rattle the windows and announce our presence, but I raise my hand and knock on the door. An old, bearded white guy in a tattered white tank top answers and looks up and down in response to our request to use his phone. He slowly draws out, "We don't have phones around here." As we are looking from him to each other and back, trying to process a reality where there are places without phone lines in the new millennium in America. We hear the crunch of footsteps on the gravel behind us, and we turn around. Up walks a young couple to ask if they could use a phone because their car has broken down and they don't have any bars on their cell phone. At this point, I'm sincerely freaking out because I've seen The Hills Have Eyes, and I'm quite convinced that all sorts of terrible things are going to happen to us this night. Probably the most pleasant of which will be death. I was calculating the odds of a backwoods Mississippi guy having an actual EMP cannon. This had to be some kind of trap, or maybe one of those hidden camera gotcha kind of shows that were so popular in the 90s. Like the one that Shannon Daughtery hosted where they scared the shit out of people for laughs. He offers to drive us to the nearest payphone, and my friend and I quietly discuss our options. Somehow she convinces me that we should go, and that she will protect us if he tries anything. We agree to take the ride and thank him, following him around the side of the trailer to his windowless white van. I balked hard at this point, but ultimately we all loaded up, and I prepared myself for the worst while silently praying as the four of us climbed in the back. I was simultaneously making peace with my life and centering myself for a potential fight to the death. Obviously, we made it. He drove us about 20 miles to a phone, and we called the cavalry without further incident. He chuckled a bunch about how weird it was that two couples' cars had broken down outside his place that night. To this day, this is still the most creepiest and weird night of my entire life.